Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. My personal interest in this debate is, of course, as with Richard Lochhead, we are the constituency members who represent Murray in this place here. And for Murray, the issue of defence is a very important one, both as an employer and as a wider economic effect. For my own part, I have little in the way of personal connection with matters military. My great-great-grandfather was a driver in the Royal Corps of Drivers and was demobbed because he'd become deaf in 1819. And my treble-great-grandfather left the HMS Medway in August 1782. And that's about it, as far as my family is concerned. Apart from the other 6 people that I'm being encouraged to talk about. But seriously, Presiding Officer, the proposed closure of the defence bases and the previous closures of defence facilities, such as the RAF presence at RAF Kinloss, had huge disruptive negative impact for communities and families that were part of the bases and interact with them. But defence estates represent a much wider problem. In tumultuous time in the world, defence is needed and must be mobilised against the fight to today's threats. It's no good continuing to invest in defence facilities that represent a response to the nuclear standoff of the 1950s, 60s, 70s and so on and so forth. I'm absolutely amazed to have heard Jackson Carlaw talk of indirectly of the £205 billion for Trident as almost a nugatory amount of money when I can consider what other things might be done. Today, of course, the threats that we face as a country and as the Western part of the world altogether are fewer now from states. They are now from non-state actors. They are ideologically and radically based groups that are not attached to particular countries, that want to break down our values of freedom and democracy through violence, fear and hateful rhetoric. Nuclear weapons have not deterred a single person in ISIS. They have not deterred North Korea, which Jackson Carlaw referred to. At the end of the day, we have to not only look at the effect on the bases here, but at the underlying military principles that are driving this, as well as, of course, the dark hand of the UK Treasury. We need effective defence, of course we do, but cutting bases simply to save money doesn't address the issue of defence in the modern world. We've got to make changes. Of course we do. In fact, the reference was made to the Battle of Waterloo. In the aftermath of that, the army was cut to a third of its size in the 3 or 4 years after the Battle of Waterloo. And that was disastrous because of some of the things that happened thereafter. It certainly left the UK in a position that it was in the Indies and in the colonies much less able to respond to threats that emerged there. Now, of course, Scotland, in terms of, I'll take an intervention, Mr. Carlaw, if you wish.
Jackson Carlaw.
Well, I'm prepared to accept Mr Stevenson may have been at Waterloo. I mean, to suggest that the reduction in the armed forces after Napoleon was defeated led to some immediate crisis for Britain's influence across the world thereafter is absolute nonsense. It was 50 years later before the threats Mr Stevenson is alluding to emerged. Of course it was the right thing to do. Defence forces must meet the threat. And although he talks about ISIS today, he can't know what the threats in the next 40 years are going to be.
Stewart Stevenson.
I'm glad he's read The Art of War, which has the wonderful quote that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And it is precise, and this is where I will agree with Jackson Carlaw, that we don't know what the threat might be next week, next year, or in 5 years' time. That is why we need flexibility and diversity in our defence provision, which is obviated by our committing huge proportions of our defence expenditure to a weapon that is incapable of being deployed, i.e. Trident. So Presiding Officer, in the modern world, the kind of threats to which we are subject require physical presence adjacent to local threats and a mobile force that can move to where international threats are. In terms of the north of Scotland, the Moray Firth, we've twice in the last 5 or 6 years seen the Kuznetsov, the biggest military ship in the Russian Navy, moored within so close in off Banff that we could see people with the naked eye, and I normally wear glasses, without my glasses, walking on the deck of the aircraft carrier. That's how close they were in. And it took more than 24 hours for any UK military presence to be there to see what the Kuznetsov was up to and perhaps protect our interests. And it is that failure to respond to the real challenges that there are in defence today that underpin the failures that we see in the basing review. Simply spending money on Trident means you don't spend money on the sort of things that we need. The Tories in particular constantly complain about business, education and healthcare budgets, but the budgets for these are dwarfed by the amount of money that they wish to see us spend on Trident. And that money, furthermore, that is spent on people in our army, is spent in bases, has wider economic benefit in a way that sending vast amounts of money to the United States for the equipment that's associated with Trident and not even receiving the codes that enable us to independently decide to use them is hardly supporting the economic interests of this country or indeed the UK as a whole. And of course, we in particular have maritime interests in Scotland. We have substantial fishing interests out to 200 miles. We have substantial oil and gas interests. And despite having all the UK's submarines based in Scotland, they are not suitable or useful for responding to the maritime threats that there are to our interests. So we've got to look at what happens in relation to navy bases. Even the Irish have got 7 vessels built specially for the purpose, based around their coastline, a smaller country than Scotland, and perfectly illustrative with their 2 maritime surveillance aircraft of what even small countries can do with more limited resources than we perhaps mind us. Let me go back to what the previous speaker, Maurice Golden, said.
Could you
he was
close
correct.
quickly, please?
He said that good defence is based on people. I agree with him. We need more of these people located in Scotland, contributing to our economies and giving these people stability for their families and friends.